Well, good morning. This is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page. It is Wednesday morning, June 14th, 2023. Hope everybody's doing all right today. All right. Well, we're going to do another video today dealing with a viewer. No, this is not really a viewer question. This is an anonymous question. I don't know if this person... Well, I'll say it this way. I got a question from somebody who has watched the live stream, but the question is from somebody that I don't know if they watched the live stream or not. Whatever. Trying to find the best way to explain it. Whatever the case may be, I got a question. That's what we're going to deal with today. Good morning, Sheila, and happy birthday, Sheila. Saw on Facebook it was your birthday today. Hope you have a good day. Gail, Connie, Lyle, Janie, good morning to everybody. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to add it to the comment section on either this page or the nearchurches.com Facebook page, and I will acknowledge them when I see them. You see that my Bible app here is open to Ruth 4. We're not starting in Ruth 4. That's just where my Bible app opens up for whatever reason on my computer. Connie has no sound. Do the rest of you have sound? I've got sound. Let me know if there's a problem, and I'll see if I can rectify it. Good morning, Shirley. Okay, Janie, sound. All right, Connie, I don't know what the problem is, but everybody else has sound. So good. Let's get started. Connie, hopefully you can sort that out. If not, maybe you can watch it later, or watch it on our YouTube channel, Mammoth Spring Church of Christ. All right. So, this is a tough question in some ways. And I kind of, where do you start this particular subject? So, the title of the video is A Question About Divorce. So, I will just read this message that I got the other day, and then we'll get started, okay? I have some questions, and try as I might, I am not finding an answer. If you had rather not, if you would rather I not ask, it's okay, I understand. The Bible tells us that it's okay to divorce when there has been infidelity. That is the word that the person used, infidelity. There are also scriptures about a contentious woman. That would be the book of Proverbs. Proverbs like it's better to dwell in the corner of a housetop than in a broad house with a contentious woman. I don't know that exact reference, but okay. So is it okay? Here's the question, ultimately. Is it okay to divorce if your spouse has been faithful in terms of sex, but the household is in craziness? We never know what we will encounter. Okay, so a couple of things in regard to the question. Think about this. The Bible tells us that it is okay to divorce when there has been infidelity. So what I'm going to do first is go to the old Matthew 19. All right? This is not going to be a video about all the different teachings on divorce and remarriage that exist, because there are several. I've got a book that actually lays out 8 different positions on divorce and remarriage. I'm not going to do anything like that today. I want to deal with this question, but I want to deal with it part by part, because like this. The Bible tells us that it is okay to divorce when there has been infidelity. So I would say most of us are familiar with Matthew chapter 19. And here's the question from the Pharisees. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for, and you notice the New King James here, for just any reason, and the word just is in italics. I believe the King James says for any cause. All right, so whatever you name it, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And Jesus' response, because he doesn't come out and just give a short yes or no. Notice what he does here. He appeals to Scripture. Have you not read? So let me stop there for just a second. Those are 4 important words when it comes to any question about the Bible. The Bible doesn't answer every question, all right? but it does give us all things that pertain to life and godliness. It doesn't answer every question about talking about marriage. The Bible does not address every possible scenario, every possible event that might occur within a marriage. But it does address a lot, and it does give us many principles in regard to a husband, what he is to be and do, and a wife and what she is to be and do. So these little words here, have you not read, are extremely important. Anyway, that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female. All right, so I will go ahead and say this. There are some people who try to teach us that Matthew 19 only applies to Christians. Well, you got a couple problems with that. Number one, there are no Christians at this point in time. Jesus was not a Christian. I've had people kind of shocked that I said that. Jesus was not a Christian. Jesus was a Jewish man who lived under the jurisdiction of the law of Moses. Galatians 4:4. He was born of a woman, born under the law. Jesus was not a Christian. He was not a member of the church. The Pharisees were not Christians. They were not members of the church. The teaching here that Jesus is giving, the response to the question, can I divorce my wife for just any cause? The answer is given under the law of Moses time frame. But notice what's said here. Jesus appeals to the beginning. Well, that precedes the law of Moses. All right, he doesn't go back to Exodus chapter 20, where one of the 10 Commandments is, thou shalt not commit adultery. He doesn't appeal to the law of Moses here. He goes back to the beginning, which predates Moses. It predates Sinai. So this is not just limited to the Christian age. It's not written just to Christians. It doesn't apply just to Christians. This goes back to the beginning. For this reason shall a man leave his father and mother, and she shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Well, of course, that is, I have a little notation here. It mentions 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and 1 Corinthians chapter 7. But here you go. Genesis 2:24. This goes back to the Garden of Eden. So whatever Jesus' answer here is to the question of, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason? The answer goes all the way back to the garden. All right? Can I put away my wife for any cause? Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate. There's your answer to that first question. Can I divorce my wife for just any reason? Matthew 19:3. Matthew 19:6. What God has joined together, let not man separate. Okay. Well, then let's get a little more specific, Jesus. Why then did Moses command to give a certificate of divorce and to put her away? Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wives. And then notice this phrase here again. But from the beginning, it was not so. Okay, so in the first part of the answer, he appeals to Genesis 2:24. In the second, in the follow-up question of the Pharisees, he appeals back to from the beginning. Divorce was never a part of God's plan. Period. Okay, we can take that one off the table in that sense. Can I divorce my wife for any cause? No. Why did Moses command this? Well, this is why he commanded it, or why he permitted it. Mark 10 actually says, Matthew 19 says, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wives. And if you look at Mark's account in Mark, I'll tell you what, since I've already mentioned it, I'll pull it up here so you can see it yourself. Mark chapter 10, same discussion here. Let's see. Mark 10:4. Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and dismiss her. Well, that's Deuteronomy 24. Because of the hardness of your heart, he wrote this precept. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, okay, we have all of that. They're no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate. So, what did Moses command you, Mark says? Mark writes, well, he permitted us to do this. So when we're looking at the option for divorce here, let's just say it that way, because you don't have to divorce your spouse if they commit fornication. Let's get that out of the way first. You don't have to divorce. It's an option. But the way it's framed by both Matthew 19 and Mark 10 is that this is it's a permissive command. You don't have to do it, but if you're going to do it, here's how you must. All right? So from the beginning it was not so. Whatever God has joined together, let not man separate. You cannot put your wife away just for any cause. And Moses permitted this because of the hardness of your hearts, but from the beginning it was not so. So in both questions that the Pharisees posed to Jesus, he appeals to the original law on marriage. This is not a Christian-only text, and there are people who actually teach that Matthew 19 only applies to Christians. Well, Jesus' answer in two ways defeats that idea, but also the fact that this isn't even the church age when this question is being asked and answered destroys that idea. I say also unto you that whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality, fornication, some versions read, and marries another commits adultery, and whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery. So the questioner asked or stated, the Bible tells us that it's okay to divorce when there has been infidelity. That's absolutely true. That is an option. Okay, again, divorce is not commanded, but this is the, you have this word here, except for the Greek word here for fornication, porneia, sexual immorality. If you divorce your spouse for anything other than them committing fornication with another person, and then you remarry, you're committing adultery. And whoever marries the one who's been divorced is committing adultery. Those are present tense terms. You are committing adultery. All right? There are also, so getting that out of the way first. All right? There are also scriptures about a contentious woman. So here's the follow-up question. So is it okay to divorce if your spouse has been faithful in terms of sex, but the household is in craziness? I guess I would say the short answer to that is what God has joined together, let not man separate, and from the beginning it was not so. No. And so there was follow-up. I'll just read to you. I'll read to you how I responded. Well, let me look at these comments first. Connie says, had a discussion with an elder who believes that a couple who are living in adultery can repent, be forgiven, and stay together. Well, that'd be pretty convenient, wouldn't it? There are folks who actually believe that there's no such thing as an adulterous marriage. We actually have a preacher in this area who I heard him say verbatim, I will never tell a couple that their marriage has them in trouble. Well, that's a cowardly answer, and it's unscriptural. But there are folks who believe that. If the Bible only applies to Christians, Deborah says, we'd be better off not being Christian and doing what we want, since only Christians would go to, would be lost. Yeah. All right, so the follow-up question was, okay, so I know that the Bible permits divorce for fornication, for infidelity. But the following is it okay to divorce if your spouse has been faithful in terms of sex, but the household is in craziness? Well, the short answer is no. But here's what I said in response to that idea. My question would be, is this a new development? Because the accusation was, well, the household's always in craziness. We don't know what we're going to get from this person. In other words, did you know about the craziness before you got married? Most of the time, you know ahead of time what you're getting into. Well, let me keep reading here. I know that sometimes there can be surprises and cover-ups before the marriage, but most of the time it is known beforehand, and by more than one person. Most people think that marriage will change the spouse and they'll grow up and get better, and that is usually the opposite of what happens. And that is usually the opposite of what happens in my experience. People think, well, I'll marry this person and I will guide them into what I want them to be. No, that's not how it works. And if that's your plan, you're not ready for marriage. If you're so naive to think that that's what you're going to do, well, then that's just completely stupid. Foolish. Maybe that's a better word. But anyway, no, there's not permission to divorce just because of craziness in the household. And then, of course, you get in all the scenarios. Well, what about drug abuse? Well, what about physical abuse or sexual abuse? Well, what God has joined together, let not man separate. From the beginning it was not so. Now, are those scenarios terrible, and are there things that can be done to help those situations, to mitigate the tragedy that is occurring and might continue to occur in the future if something is not done? Yes, I think there are, but divorce is not the option. And to a lot of people, as you hear that, that's like, man, that's hard. How could you say that? Because Scripture permits one reason for divorce. And that's it. If your friends and family are telling you not to marry someone, listen to them. They see something you don't. And that's a comment by a viewer here. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen that over the years. I've done the same thing with people in premarital counseling. You don't need to marry this person. This is what's going to happen. And within a few years, it's exactly what happened. And they got divorced. And at least one of the spouses committed fornication. I mean, it's typically to an outside, to like a third party, things are more obvious. You can be more objective. So many people are like, oh, I'm just in love. These people that I warned several years ago not to get married, one of the things that the girl said to me was, well, he just has my heart. And that's just so naive and blind because of emotion. Love is not an emotion. It involves that, certainly. But if you're going into a marriage because so-and-so has your heart, well, you're not going in with your eyes open. Sheila says, I lived in a marriage where I suffered many concussions, broken bones, etc. I suspected fornication but could not prove it, but I lived in fear daily. The minister told me leaving could cause him to commit adultery if I left, so I stayed until I caught him cheating. I left immediately then. See, and Sheila, I've been in situations like that before as a minister. Well, what do I do now? You can leave the house for a while. You can put yourself in safety. You can put your children in safety. I think that's bad advice. So I tell you what, let's do this. Matthew chapter 5. I want to look at this passage too. Going down here, Matthew 5, 31 and 32. Furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. Well, that would be a reference to Deuteronomy 24. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason, except sexual immorality, causes her to commit adultery. So this is the same scenario. Can I put my wife away just for any cause? Well, if you do that, if you just divorce your wife or your husband for whatever cause, you leave them, you are putting them in a case. I would say the answer that you got, Sheila, was partly right. I could cause them to commit adultery. That's why you don't divorce them. You separate yourself from them. You get some type of protection. But Jesus does talk about this. If you divorce his wife for any reason except, there's one exception for divorce, and that's fornication. You cause them to commit adultery. And whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. So there are passages that address this. Hey, Brian, good to see you. But this idea that, well, I can marry this person and, well, the house is crazy. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean they are like insane? Or you don't like the way things are going, or you thought it would be different? One way that I've said it is, and particularly with young women, I don't think this is the case as much with young men. With young women, and particularly Christian young women, they have an extremely romanticized view of marriage. And basically it's like they want the wedding, they want the beautiful ceremony, they want all the bridesmaids, they want everything perfect, they want the music, they want it all perfect. They want a wedding. They don't want a marriage. And I do think that that's a danger that, like I said, particularly Christian young women can buy into. They want a wedding, they don't want a marriage. And David, you're right. Once the honeymoon is over, the real work begins. Marriage takes a lot of work. People are messy. Absolutely right. And when you're in that process of what we call dating or courting, whatever you want to call it, you typically see the best of that person all the time because you're not living together and you're not having to deal with the day-to-day stresses of financial issues, maybe health issues, children. There are so many circumstances that I hate to use the word complicate, but that can complicate the relationship between a husband and wife. And when you're just dating, again, you always just see the best of each other, typically. And here's a sad reality too. And I've been preaching for 25 years, and we often hear this. Well, Christians marry Christians. That's good advice. I don't advise any Christian to marry a non-Christian. But here's the reality. You can marry someone who grew up going to church and yet not marry a Christian, because again, once you're in that relationship, and now once you've moved in together, you're living together, it's two different ball games. Let's say it that way. Connie says, I don't like the versions that say immorality. There can be immorality without the sex act. Fornication is different from immorality. And I agree with you, Connie. And that's one of the shortfalls of the New King James Version. And the New King James Version is inconsistent because sometimes it does use the word fornication and sometimes it does use the word sexual immorality. I wish they would just be consistent and use fornication. But the word fornication itself is just a transliteration. The Greek word is porneia. They just took the letters of the Greek language and brought them over into English. They didn't define that term. But I agree with you in that sense. So my response was, well, no, there's one reason for divorce, and particularly, typically when we get into this discussion, we talk about remarriage. There's one reason for divorce and remarriage, and that, we go to Matthew chapter 19, verse 9 for that, and it's fornication only. But divorce in general, from the beginning, it was not so. What God has joined together, let not man separate. Sheila says, my husband was a Christian and preaching in the pulpit and radio. No one knew the home life. And see, that's exactly what I was saying, Sheila. You married a Christian, didn't you? Supposedly. So the sad reality is, maybe the sad reality in the form of a question is, do you really know what you're getting before you actually get into you're in the home, you're alone, now you get to see everything? Yeah. That can be a different story. And obviously, it can be. And I've known of other scenarios that are just like that. It's like, yeah, I didn't know what I was getting into. Well, that can happen. Sadly, that can happen. So anyway, divorce. All right, I'll tell you what. So many passages kind of going through my mind. One verse, obviously, Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 4. Marriage is to be honorable among all, and the bed is to be undefiled. But fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Now, see, here's one of those, who was it? Connie earlier that said something about sexual immorality versus fornication. Well, here it is. They use, the New King James translators there use the word fornicators. The King James uses the word whoremongers. That's an interesting choice of terms. So, a bit of inconsistency that I'm not crazy about. When you look at, so anyway, we're here, Hebrews 13:4. Marriage is honorable among all. Some versions say something like marriage is to be held in honor among all, and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. So let me get back here to Matthew 19 in this particular discussion. Can I put away my wife for just any cause? Well, condensed, what God has joined together, let not man separate. Okay, well, what about what Moses said? Yes, this is what he said because of the hardness of your hearts, but from the beginning it was not so. That's not hard to understand. We know what that means. Divorce has never been in God's picture for marriage, except for fornication. If you put away your wife, so here's what the text says explicitly. If I divorce my wife for any reason other than her committing fornication and get married again, I am committing adultery. And this phrase here, committing adultery. So I've got my Bible open. I tell you what, one of the best tools you can have if you're a serious Bible student is a wide margin Bible, because you can make so many notes and write down helpful things here. This phrase here, or these two words, commits adultery, is a present tense verb. It would literally read, and whoever divorces his wife except for fornication and marries another is committing adultery. Now, there are some people, like the guy in this area, who says it's not possible to live in an adulterous marriage. Well, guess what? Jesus says otherwise. If you have a divorce for any reason other than fornication and you get married again, you are committing adultery. And whoever marries her who is divorced is committing adultery. So now you pull another party in. It's not just this one, but now somebody else is pulled into the picture of present tense is committing adultery. And again, this predates Christianity, but the appeal is made all the way back to the garden. God's marriage law is universal and eternal. It applies to everybody for all time, and it goes all the way back to the garden. It doesn't change for Christian to non-Christian. It doesn't change from Christian to atheist, skeptic, whatever. God's marriage law is universal and eternal. It never changes. And so you can live in a state of adultery. I'll tell you what, here's a passage that shows that we can live in sin. If it's the case that you cannot live in sin, well, we encounter a problem here in Colossians chapter 3, because we're talking about being raised with Christ. That's connected in Colossians 2 and verse 12 with being buried in baptism. Well, you're buried and then you're raised with Christ. Colossians 3 here, verse 5. Therefore put to death your members which are on the earth, fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, covetousness, which is idolatry. Because of these things the wrath of God is coming upon the sons of disobedience. Listen to verse 7. In which you yourselves once walked when you lived in them. You can absolutely live in a state of sin. No question about that. Regarding the scenario of adulterous couples staying married after baptism, only God makes a marriage. My comments jumped on me here. Only God makes a marriage. The state does not deem you... Oh, come on. The state does not deem you married in the eyes of God. If the marriage was adulterous before baptism, it wasn't recognized by God to begin with. Excellent comment. Absolutely right. And my comments keep jumping. So let me get back to where I was. Okay, if a homosexual couple came to be baptized, would we allow them to stay married? No, because they weren't married to begin with. They were living in a sexually immoral state, committing fornication, regardless of what state regardless of what state might say about their union. Yeah, the state, okay. Also, in order to be baptized in the eyes of God, you must repent. Repentance only comes with a change of heart and action. Excellent comment, Coleman, thank you. And I think that's what people miss. It's like, well, okay, forget adultery. Name any other sin that you can persist in. Well, I can be baptized. All of my sins are washed away. Can I persist in that sin then? Yeah, so that's a great point. If it's adulterous before your baptism, if you are living in adultery, if you're committing adultery before baptism, and you maintain that relationship, you're still in adultery. There's no repentance there. Deborah says, are they using the same word for adultery as they are for fornication in this passage? Tell me what you're talking about there, Deborah. Are you talking about Matthew 19? Let me know. Or are you talking about Colossians 3? Clear that up for me, please, Deborah, and I'll be happy to answer that question for you. All right, so craziness in a marriage, perhaps mental instability, whatever the case may be. Divorce is sin. Now, is every divorce a sin? Well, obviously not. And, we could think of other scenarios from the Bible, by the way. So if God's marriage law is universal, and it is, and it's eternal, and it is, then we can look at other passages that deal with divorce that is recognized or permitted by God. I think of Ezekiel, Ezra chapter 10, when the Jews of captivity had intermarried, and the law of Moses specifically forbade that. What were they supposed to do? They had to put them away. That was the only way to be right. Herod. What am I trying to think of here? John the Baptizer. It is not lawful for you to have her. He had married his brother Philip's wife. It is not lawful for you to have her. Well, that divorce then would have been permitted, but he didn't have a right to be married to her in the first place. Yeah, maybe it was Colossians. It said adultery for remarrying another instead of fornication. Well, the Colossians 3 passage is talking about, and I've still got that up here on the screen, talking about walking in and living in sin, and one of those would be fornication. Okay? Now, obviously adultery is not specifically mentioned in that passage, but the point is you can live in a state of sin. Adultery is a state of sin, and with Jesus' use of the present tense there in Matthew 19, if you do this except for this reason and get remarried, you are committing adultery. So for people to teach that you cannot live in an adulterous marriage is just completely without biblical foundation. All right, we have to be honest with the biblical text, and let Jesus speak instead of reading something into the text. And I tell you what happens most of the time. Most of the time, people will teach things like that, or they will change what they used to preach because a son or daughter got involved, or maybe they're involved in a bad situation, or someone, maybe a member of their congregation that they're close to, maybe an elder, and they'll say, well, I need to re-examine my belief on divorce and remarriage. It's kind of like the women's role stuff we looked at last week. Well, we did a 6-month study and we changed our mind. Well, that's convenient. So were you wrong then, or you were wrong now? So anyway, let me pull this comment back up here. So I gave my answer to that question to the viewer. I read my answer to you, and a response came back. It says, and this is about me, so is he saying if you knew of some of her specialness, that he is to remain in a horrible marriage? Well, that's an argument from emotion. That's kind of it's putting words in my mouth, and it's changing craziness to specialness. It's kind of reframing the question, and then, well, it's a horrible marriage. Well, nobody's denying it's a horrible marriage, but the answer that I gave was true. And so it's not my fault. I'm not the bad guy for saying, no, there's only one reason for divorce. Fornication. God would approve of that. Now, it's not commanded. You're permitted to divorce. You don't have to. But trying to reframe it like that. Anyway, it goes on from there, and the person's finally like, yeah, they kind of get away from the specialness and the craziness, just more about talking about that marriage itself. And so there's not really anywhere else to go from those questions or comments that I received. So part of the problem with this discussion, and the way I've framed it, is like this. Matthew 19 is very easy to understand. Okay, Matthew 19 is not a difficult text. In fact, let me scroll back here to get back to Matthew chapter 19. The text is plain. No, you cannot divorce your wife for any reason. Moses gave you this permission. Remember to couple this with Mark chapter 10. But from the beginning, it was not so. Okay, like I said, this has never been a part of God's plan. But Jesus, the Son of God, does give an exception in terms of getting a divorce and being remarried. to me, one of the most important verses in Matthew 19 is verse 10. Look at the disciples' response. If such is the case of the man with his wife, it's better not to marry. If your teaching is so, let's use the words that are thrown around today that I've been called, narrow-minded, pharisaical. Jesus is pharisaical. That's the charge. I've been called pharisaical for dealing with Matthew 19. Well, really, that's what you're calling Jesus, because I'm just telling you what he said. The disciples' response is, if that's the way it's got to be, if that's the strictness of it, maybe we shouldn't get married. That, to me, Matthew 19:10 really should open your eyes to the seriousness of marriage. All right? This isn't something you just jump into. And, we even go to, in the ceremonies, we even talk about, marriage is not something to be entered into lightly. Those aren't just words that we say. So I pulled this passage up. I think this is part of the discussion too, necessary part of the discussion. Walk prudently when you go to the house of God, and draw near to hear rather than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they do evil. Do not be rash with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything hastily before God. You think this could apply to marriage vows? For God is in heaven, you are on earth, therefore let your words be few. Verse 4, when you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. Maybe that needs to be part of our premarital counseling of young people, and even older people too. If it's an anonymous person, why not describe the craziness? That's why I brought up my marriage. The question lacks the facts of the relationship, which could be setting you up for a trap answer. That's a good point, Sheila. I'll tell you, it was sent to me by someone that I'm related to. I don't have any clue who this other person is. So, there is no telling. And that's one of the problems with anonymous, with anonymity. Maybe it's, maybe there's a lot more there that could be said that they wanted to hold back to maybe present a better picture, some bias, and that you're absolutely right. A trap, and that's essentially what the Pharisees were trying to do there with Jesus in Matthew 19. They were trying to trap him against Moses specifically and catch him in his words. All right, guys. I don't really know where else to go. I think I've covered what I wanted to cover, and I appreciate all of your interaction and comments and questions. I always enjoy that. A question about divorce. Well, one thing, divorce is too cheap and easy to get. I think that's a big thing. I think particularly young people don't appreciate commitment. And was it David Stambursky earlier that said hard work? I think a lot of times young people look at older couples who have made it for 30, 40, 50 years, and they see that. Let's do it this way. They see them at church, and they're holding hands. They're always smiling and laughing. They see a facade. Okay, and maybe if you followed them home, maybe it would look like that too. But don't judge the reality and challenges of marriage from a happy couple that you see a few hours a week, because again, that would be what you would call a facade, a facial appearance. Marriage is not easy. It's great. I think of, was it Proverbs 18:22? He who finds a wife finds a good thing. But my wife would tell you, it's difficult. Marriage has its difficulties, and in a variety of ways, not just dealing with one another, but there are a lot of external circumstances that can make marriage more difficult and things like this. And but it's good. Marriage is a good thing, and God designed it. And anyway, Deborah says it's a hard subject because of the emotions involved. The emotions and the scenarios. Again, that the Bible doesn't address every specific scenario. And so we have to use sound judgment based on scriptural teaching. So Seems like a lot of folks nowadays say, well, we can get married, and if it doesn't work out, we can get a divorce. Well, that's exactly what I was saying. Divorce is cheap and easy. And I think one thing, too, I keep going on here, but I think one thing, too, in terms of divorce is in the moment, okay, let's say this husband and his crazy wife, or this wife and her crazy husband. Make it fair and balanced here. In the moment, when they're thinking, hey, our option is to get out, they're not thinking about anybody else. If they have children, they're not thinking about the children. That may come up, peripherally, but in the moment, it's them. I really don't like him right now. And here's the thing, you're not always going to like your spouse. They're not always going to be likable. I know that's the case with me sometimes. I'm not always likable. We can be short and snappy, and the day-to-day minutia that can come out, it's not always easy, but a lot of times it gets very selfish. We don't think about the kids. We don't think about how it affects, if you have children, your schools, your church, your extended family members, and people are ready to just get out at the most difficult moments instead of try to work through it. And it's because divorce is cheap and easy. And marriage is the exact opposite. It's expensive and hard. So the easiest thing to do is just get out, I guess. Don't cut that and edit it and make me be saying something I didn't say, by the way. All right, guys, I think that's all I've got for today. I really appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate all the questions and comments. I always enjoy the interaction. The last stream of the week will be live here tonight at Mammoth Spring at 7 p.m. Central. We're looking at several different topics, talking about division, talking about Bible authority. So if you're sick, can't get out, whatever the case may be, we'll be here live at 7 p.m. Central Time. And I've got some new stuff starting for Monday. I've got some viewer questions in that have come in the last couple days, so Monday we'll pick up on some new material. Have a good rest of your day and a good week, and hope to see you back here Monday at 11 o'clock.